My name is Elizabeth Blackstock, U.S. editor over at Planet F1, and I am a self-professed motorsport history nerd who cannot stop looking at old racetracks. Today on the F1 Word, I'm taking over from Sean to talk about some of the most unbelievable circuits Formula One used to race on. Let's dig in. First up is Reims. To win a race at Reims, a driver needed patience. This 5.6-mile circuit was built on roads carving through the French countryside in a roughly triangular shape. To have the edge, you needed to be a master of the art of slipstreaming. The French Grand Prix at Reims was hosted 11 different times, and it was such a huge hit for the Formula One fraternity for one big reason. It came with a huge prize. In an era where the best of the best could be expected to make around $20,000 per year in racing, the starting purse alone for Reims was $3,000 per entrant. That's a huge amount of money. Add to that the cases of champagne distributed by race organizers for every minor accomplishment, like setting the fastest time of the day or being the first driver to lap above a certain speed. You could guarantee compelling racing through the series of high-speed straights. Next up, Circuito de Monsanto. In 1959, the Circuito de Monsanto in Portugal hosted its first and only Formula One Grand Prix. The track was built in the Monsanto Forest Park near Lisbon, and the track itself was composed of a ton of different surfaces. In his 1959 race report for Motorsport magazine, Dennis Jenkinson described the circuit as such. The whole nature of the circuit is one of pure road racing, with nothing in the way of banked corners or wide open spaces to make things easy for the drivers. In fact, just the opposite. With tricky cambers, braking to be done on curves, blind corners, tree-line sections, and all of the normal difficulties met with in everyday driving. Stirling Moss won that race in 1959, but then the track closed for good in 1971. Our third track, Sebring International Raceway, is still used today, but it hasn't been used for Formula One in decades. It earns a slot on our list for a couple different reasons. In 1959, it hosted the first U.S. Grand Prix, at least the first that wasn't also the Indianapolis 500, and it emerged from a series of rough outlines sketched into a defunct military airbase. See, Sebring emerged as the result of interpersonal conflict between the SCCA and the AAA, the two distinct motorsport sanctioning bodies in post-World War II America, and it gained legitimacy when street circuits were banned in the United States. Almost every notable track at that time, from Watkins Glen to Road America, ran on public roads. Sebring was the only road course situated on private property, and so until the locals were able to revive their favorite circuits, there was nowhere for them to go but that airfield. And it was the fact that it was on an airfield that made everyone hate it. In Robert Daly's 1961 book, Cars at Speed, he has nothing but criticism. The track is 90 miles from the nearest airport. There's no way for spectators to arrive except by car. The circuit is flat, plus the local hotels jack up their prices for the weekend. Looking at Sebring now as it hosts big events like the 12 Hours of Sebring, it's kind of impossible to imagine that it once had Grand Prix cars on it. Fourth up is a true classic, the Nürburgring. This track, yes, is well known and widely renowned, but it is still kind of incredible to consider the fact that this winding, dangerous surface was once so incredibly popular in Formula One. It was 14.2 miles, one of the biggest circuits on the calendar, and it regularly hosted F1 events between 1951 and 2013. To race on it, you kind of have to treat it as reverence. Back in the day, there were over 170 curves per lap, straining the very limits of a driver's ability to memorize the nuance of each turn. Plus, the surface was covered in bumps, and it wound through the forested mountainside of the Rhineland. The track was such a notoriously difficult one that in Robert Daly's 1961 book Cars at Speed, Stirling Moss claimed that, quote, only 30 drivers in the world are skilled enough to race at Le Mans or the Nürburgring. That organizers allowed so many more than that to take part in various events only made the races all the more dangerous. When we think about Formula One races in Africa, we generally think of the South African Grand Prix hosted at Kyalami. But well before that circuit appeared on the F1 calendar, we had Ain-Diab, located in Casablanca, Morocco. The track, built in 1957 in only 6 weeks, was used for one single F1 event in 1958. The circuit was roughly rectangular in shape, tracing both the desert road toward Azamur and the coastal road running through the city Abderrahmane Forest. Unsurprisingly, the circuit was super dangerous. In its one single F1 outing in 1958, Stirling Moss won the race, but his Van Wall teammate Stuart Lewis Evans was killed in a fiery wreck. As you might imagine, Ain-Diab never returned. Located in Switzerland, Circuit Bremgarten was a mainstay on the early Formula One calendar. The 4.5-mile track was renowned for its thrilling nature, a collection of high-speed corners without the relief of a straight, snaking through the Bremgarten-walled forest. As you'd probably imagine about a forest circuit, the track was lined with trees, and those trees created a ton of different obstacles. If you drove off the track, you were certain to hit one, yeah, but the thick foliage also blocked the light, so it left most of the racing surface bathed in shadow. If it rained, which it was likely to do, the water pooled up in those shaded areas and made conditions even trickier. Plus, when it got dark, you couldn't see. Though the track claimed the lives of drivers like Achille Varzi, it was ultimately only shuttered in 1955 as a result of the Le Mans disaster. Before World War II, the 15.894-mile Circuito de Pescara was better known as the track that played host to the Coppa Acerbo, a name that was changed after the war, as the founder's brother, Giacomo Acerbo, was a well-known fascist politician. The track appeared on the F1 calendar just once, in 1957, after both the Dutch and Belgian Grand Prix were cancelled. It was so large that it featured two different 3.4-mile straights. Race organizers didn't even bother collecting tickets or charging fees for most spectators, because it was way too big to even make sure every viewer was paid up. Understandably, the circuit was never used for F1 again, and it only lasted a handful more years as a sports car venue before racing was totally discontinued there in 1961. The 1959 German Grand Prix took place at the fearsome Avis circuit. I'm not going to try to pronounce what Avis stands for, but it is effectively a German phrase that means automobile traffic and training road. The track was composed of two super long straightaways that were part of a highway, linked together by two turns. The most frightening turn, though, was called the Wall of Death, and it was at the north end of the track. It was a whopping 43-degree banked corner, and it was paved with bricks and featured no retaining wall up at the top. You had to take that turn at high speed to withstand the banking, but if you went too fast or lost control, you would fly right over the edge. During the Grand Prix weekend, racing star Jean Barra was killed in a support race by doing exactly that. The track was never included on an F1 calendar again. I'll pull from Robert Daly in his book Cars of Speed once more, but drivers hated Avis. Stirling Moss called it a dump, and the author himself described it as both a freak track and a travesty. Last up is my personal favorite, Circuit de Charade, sometimes also known as Clermont-Ferrand. It is probably one of the most absurd tracks in F1 history. It was about 8 kilometers and it twisted around the base of an extinct volcano in France. It hosted F1 events in 1965, 1969, 1970, and 1972, before the sinuous twisting track layout was eventually nixed from the schedule. Why? Well, in 1969, drivers like Yuck and Rindt suffered from severe motion sickness thanks to the never-ending slew of sharp turns and elevation changes. Then, in 1972, the fact that the track actually hugged a volcano became a serious issue. 10 drivers suffered punctures because of the rock that was falling down off that volcano, and Helmut Marko was blinded when a rock embedded itself in one of his eyes mid-race. After that, the track was deemed way too dangerous, and it was removed from the F1 calendar. Of course, these are only a handful of the truly wild tracks that used to pop up in Formula One. Drop your personal favorites down in the comments, and don't forget to head to planetf1.com for more deep dives into F1 history. My name is Elizabeth Blackstock, this is the F1 Word, and I'll see you next time.